Thank you for joining us for this session on artificial intelligence and the future of grape growing. Today we'll be talking about what AI is, what it's doing in the vineyard today, and what it might do for you in the future. To make it all more concrete, we have Carlos and Margarita from Chandon with us. They're going to share their experience and some advice in adopting some of these new AI tools into their grape growing. And hopefully that will help you moving forward as well. Now, before we begin, a few logistical notes. This session is pre-recorded. However, some of the speakers are available in the live chat. So if you have questions for anything along the way, just pop them into the live chat over here and they'll answer them as we go along. Now, before we get started, a quick shout out to our sponsors.
This session is sponsored by Turrentine Brokerage, guiding clients through supply cycles for 50 years. And Lumo, smart irrigation technology designed for ambitious growers.
Over the last 10 to 20 years, there's been little innovation when it comes to irrigation for agriculture. Irrigating manually is very expensive. Not only do you have to turn all your valves on and off, but you also have to use that labor to monitor your lines. Once the valves are on, how do you know that you're getting the water to the crop that you wanted? You might have broken lines or clogged lines, and all that requires labor, driving around on trucks. And labor's getting more expensive, it's getting harder to find, fuel's getting more expensive. So if you can eliminate that manual labor from your irrigation operation, you're gonna have huge savings. What Lumo is we're a smart irrigation valve, and honestly it's also so much more because we've got built-in sensors, built-in connectivity, built-in computers that allow that valve to not only be controlled remotely but also monitored and managed, so you have complete accountability around how much water you're using on your crop and that it's being used at the most efficient way possible. What our ultimate goal is at Lumo is to help growers conserve their most precious resources, which is time, money, and water.
Okay then, let's jump right in. Tom, would you start us off by introducing yourself and then giving us some insight into AI technology and where it's being used in the vineyard today?
Yes, great. Thank you, Kim. My name is Tom Chapman. I am the founder of Thule, and I now run the Thule business unit within CropX. Thule was recently acquired by CropX. Thule provides growers with information to help them make irrigation decisions. We started as a technology that came out of UC Davis. We measure actual evapotranspiration, water stress, applied irrigation, and we provide irrigation recommendations. I'm really happy to be here on this panel with Margarita and Carlos, who are two of our customers. Also, I'm really happy to be here with Cassie at HotSpot. HotSpot is a company we collaborate with a lot, as Thule helps provide information about agronomic information about making irrigation decisions, and then HotSpot provides automation services for helping the growers to execute those decisions. What I wanted to talk about for kicking off our session here is I wanted to define what is artificial intelligence, what is machine learning, what is an algorithm. We hear so much in the media these days about AI, and like marketers just love AI. It's just like this broad concept, so everyone can kind of latch onto it and try to make themselves sound impressive. And I was hoping by defining some of these concepts, it'll help make it so everyone in our conversation today, as well as for the listeners in the audience, to really have a kind of a common understanding of what these terms mean and how it applies to the world of viticulture and winemaking. So I want to start with artificial intelligence. And the definition of artificial intelligence is a computer system that performs a task that would otherwise require human intelligence. So if a computer is doing something, a computer system in some way is doing something that you normally think of as a human doing, then it's an example of AI. And in the world of viticulture and in winemaking, we're going to be discussing in our presentation today three areas of it, or three examples, or I should say types of AI. One is monitoring. So you normally think of a human going out into a vineyard and looking at the vines and monitoring the vines, but we're increasingly seeing computer systems being able to do this. So that's an example of an AI because it's a computer system that is doing something you otherwise would think of a human doing. Another example is robotics or another type of AI we're going to talk about today on the panel is robotics. So you normally think of a human going out into a vineyard and turning on a pump and opening a valve. But with products like HotSpot Ag, we now have computer systems that can turn on a pump and open a valve. So that's an example of an AI because it's a computer system doing something that you would normally think of humans doing. And then lastly, this isn't really something we'll focus a lot on in our panel today, but I find it necessary to mention large language models or LLMs, for example, ChatGPT, because we really can't talk about AI these days without at least acknowledging ChatGPT and what a splash it's had in the broader media landscape. And ChatGPT, if you happen to have been isolated on a mountaintop and have just come down from that mountaintop right now and are unfamiliar with it, ChatGPT is an example of an AI where you normally think of needing to talk to another human to get an intelligent response and a coherent response. And ChatGPT is an application where you can talk to a computer system and get an intelligent response back from it. So first, I want to make sure we've defined artificial intelligence, and hopefully that sets a common foundation and understanding for all of us. The next things I want to talk about I want to define what an algorithm is, because we hear a lot about algorithms when talking about technology these days. I also want to define what is a neural network. A neural network is a type of algorithm. And neural networks are really the algorithm type that has powered so much of the renaissance in AI that we've been seeing over the last 5 years or so. So let's start with an algorithm. And I just hear a lot out there, and again, in media and just people, different companies talking about their algorithms. And it's like, well, what does that mean? What is an algorithm? And whenever you hear algorithm, I want you to think recipe. An algorithm is a recipe, just like a recipe that you would use to bake a cake. It is a set of instructions that takes some input and transforms that input to create an output. So in the case of baking a cake, the inputs are eggs and flour, sugar, etc. And then the recipe or the algorithm are the instructions on how to mix all those ingredients and the order to mix them in and how long to bake it. And the output is a delicious cake. In the case of technology, when we're talking about algorithms, we're generally talking about data as the input. So maybe it's a picture of your vines, or maybe it's the data coming off a wine tank about the temperature and headspace and other things like that in a wine tank. Then algorithm is the part that takes that data and transforms it in some way, does some calculations on that data, and produces a useful output. And that output might be, for example, an instruction to a machine to run a pump over. So an algorithm is just a recipe. And so whenever you hear algorithm, think recipe. How are AI and algorithms related? Remember, AI is this broad concept, this idea, a computer system that does something a human does. An algorithm is what enables an AI. Algorithm is a set of instructions for making a computer system do something that you would normally think of a human doing. Machine learning is another example of something we hear a lot about these days. And machine learning is just a type of algorithm. In the old days of writing, well, this is still true actually in general. In general, when you're writing code and programming a computer, you're generally writing every single instruction in the algorithm. Take the eggs, break the eggs, get this much flour, then do this, then do that. Machine learning takes a different approach to creating an algorithm. And machine learning is really important because it's really machine learning that has enabled this new class of algorithms that are so powerful that we're seeing this renaissance in AI and all these new neat applications such as ChatGPT. So in machine learning, what we're doing is we're not explicitly writing out every single instruction. Instead, we're telling the machine, here's some inputs, here's the flour and the eggs, etc. And here's some outputs, here's the cake. And I want you to figure out the instructions. I'm not going to tell you the instructions. I'm just going to give you lots of examples of inputs and outputs, and you're going to figure out the instructions. Machine learning is not artificial intelligence. It's a method for producing artificial intelligence. An algorithm is a method for producing artificial intelligence. It's a set of instructions, and machine learning is just a different type or approach to creating algorithms. So when you hear the next time you're listening to the radio or on TV and you hear some marketing content about machine learning, you can think, oh yeah, that's machine learning is a way to create recipes, and those recipes are used to produce artificial intelligence. And this is my last technical slide about artificial intelligence. This slide I want to talk about a neural network, and I feel like we have to bring up neural networks because this is something you hear about in the media, and it's also it's sort of the equivalent of like why you need to know what a steam you would have needed to know what a steam engine is if you lived in the time of the Industrial Revolution. Like a neural network is a type of algorithm that is really powering all of the it's sort of like the breakthrough type of algorithm that enables all these interesting applications of AI that we're seeing these days. Just as the steam engine during the age of the Industrial Revolution powered all these changes to the economy and manufacturing. So a neural network is a type of algorithm. Remember, an algorithm is a set of instructions for taking some input and producing some output. And the thing that I want you guys to note about this is a neural network is just a very powerful type of algorithm that's very versatile. Yes, it's got some interesting attributes, like it's modeled after biological neural networks, i.e. brains. But mostly I just want you to know, like, okay, neural networks, they're kind of the thing that's like the steam engine of this AI revolution that we're going through. This is like the thing at the foundation of AI that's enabling all this. Sometimes when people talk about neural networks, they say deep learning. That's why you hear in the media people talking about, oh, we use deep learning to create the best email marketing platform for you. It's like, yeah, they're talking about how they're somehow using neural networks. So just to recap, I want to check my notes real quick, make sure I hit all the main points. But just to recap, artificial intelligence is any sort of computer system that does something that you normally think of a human doing. So that can be, an example of that can be a system that turns on and off your valves and your pumps, because you're not having a human do it, you're having a computer system or a product do it. Recipes or algorithms are recipes that are used to produce artificial intelligence, and neural networks and machine learning are just different approaches to, they're either different algorithms or approaches to creating those algorithms. So that's really the introduction I want to give on AI. I hope that the audience found this illuminating and useful as you kind of navigate the space and all the chatter out there about what is AI and how does all this stuff work.
Thank you, Tom. That was helpful. And I think we'll be able to draw on this as we continue our conversation here going forward. So next, I'd like to go over to you, Carl, to talk a little bit about how Chandon has, here in the past few years, adopted more of these types of technologies into your vineyard projects. Do you want to give us an overview of what you've been doing?
Sure. Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Tom, for that thorough explanation of AI. Talking a bit about me, I'm working as a wine growing director at Domaine Chandon in California. We are farming nearly 700 acres of vineyards, Um, uh, Going back to the beginning of my work 5 years ago, I started following the Moet Hennessy ambition to reduce the water efficiency, increase the water efficiency, reduce water usage in the vineyard. But maybe that in a broader scenario of managing the vineyards in a different way from what was in the past, increasing the efficiency and resiliency of the vineyards. And part of that came as naturally as many vineyards were coming to an end. So we needed to create a master plan to replant many acres. In that plan to replant acres, we were taking some assumptions. We were assuming that there will be, of course, the need of maximizing the assets that the company had, but at the same time reducing the inputs in the vineyards. And so that master plan was, of course, taking into account the probably as one of the first pillars, the quality of the grapes that we will be farming, and making sure that the vineyards have resiliency and also longevity, because was one of the topics that we discussed a lot at that time. So as a result, 4 or 5 years ago, we approved a plan, an ambitious plan on replanting, and part of the plan was considering what considerations we need to make, assuming that the vineyards will last ideally more than 30 years, and what technology we will need to tackle in the future years. So part of the assumptions also there was to assume that there's a lot of spatial differences, especially in Napa with different type soils. So we reduce the block size. Probably in the past, the typical block size was about 5 acres. We reduce it to 2, or about 2 acres. And then we assume that within that, the smaller footprint for an irrigation valve, we would need a second set of risers and valves to irrigate only weak areas. In that way, to be able to reduce the water usage. We also assume labor costs going up, but at the same time, employees being able to manage more technology. So iPad use is something relatively common today for our irrigators, but also for vineyard supervision and other tasks. So we started designing those vineyards with the capacity to get automation. And part of that was making sure that we had in the pump stations variable frequency drivers, so we would be able to irrigate as many blocks or sub-blocks together without many constraints. And of course, the type of valves would be a solenoid valve. The stations where the manifolds would be put together in as much as possible. So that was, I would say, the first phase. And then on a second phase, we started design, having a conversation about how we will take advantage of the first improvements in those vineyards. So about 2 years ago, we engaged with different companies on how we could improve our irrigation, or start with irrigation automation and improve the parameters that we measure when we irrigate, like the pressure on the systems, and as a result. We adopted HotSpot as a company for starting in 2 of our vineyards with a plan for automating about 150 acres. So the plan was deployed 2 years ago, and the idea is to continue adopting automation on the blocks that we are redeveloping. So we don't need to retrofit too many blocks, but any new block coming in will be automated. Of course, the initial investment is a bit higher because there are many things that need to be done at the pump station levels. And we decided in some cases to retrofit some of the old blocks. So what I would like to mention here is that we have realized that there are many things that we were taking for granted, like the efficiency of the systems, the uniformity of the application within a system, and Napa, in the topography we farm is not an easy one. So I believe in automation as much as possible, but at the same time, I acknowledge that we are farming a very high value crop. So supervision still needs to be there. There are many things that I think we are in the right path. But the fact that we have a difficult topography, we have issues, natural issues like animals damaging the irrigation systems. We still acknowledge the fact that we need to continue with a close supervision of our blocks when irrigating. But I see much more value on an irrigator to check on an iPad if the pressures are okay or within the parameters in our blocks, rather than being on an ATV. Of course, if needed, but we are lucky to have the service from HotSpot and we have been learning a lot. Margarita will explain more in depth how we have done the irrigation in the last 2 years.
Thank you, Carlos. Margarita, he queued you up pretty well there. So would you want to give us a quick introduction to yourself and talk about the implementation you guys have been doing in the vineyards?
Yes, of course. My name is Margarita Postoronca, and I work together with Carlos at domain Chandon as a viticulturist. So as he already mentioned, we farm close to 700 acres between Napa and Sonoma. And one of my job responsibilities is to create irrigation work orders and check on their completion and work with our irrigators on that. So yeah, about 2 years ago, we started working with HotSpot, and it was an interesting project because we did have to retrofit some of the older blocks, but we also worked on some of the recently developed blocks to set up the system properly. And during that time, there was an interesting learning curve that HotSpot did the application rate analysis for us in order to set up the system, because it is part of the setup, which allowed us to understand that the system potentially has not been working as well as we thought it was. It was not terrible, nothing was terrible, but there were things that we did not know about our system, or the pressure wasn't there, or the application rates were not there. So that was one of the first points that we've learned as we installed the system. and what we thought was actually what we thought was applied was different from what actually was applied out in the field. And that's one of the things why I like using HotSpot, because again, it allowed us to complete that analysis. We did our homeworks, and now we're more confident in creating the irrigation work orders, or just knowing that, again, the system works properly and we've done all the preparation and the distribution rates are uniform. You know, and as Carlos mentioned, that it's important to be planning for future, and another part of the planning is not only to gain efficiency, but also to, in a way, try to predict of what's going to happen in the future, because obviously the technology is developing. We don't know exactly how and what is going to be created next, and what are the changes that are coming to agriculture, but we know that things are happening. And especially in agriculture, it seems like most of the tools that are being developed currently are focused on gaining efficiencies and control over our actions in the vineyard. So automated irrigation, to me, is, you know, it's a perfect example of how we can be more efficient, more effective, and have a better control of what it is we do in the field. And, you know, to have control over something when you work in agriculture is a big deal, because clearly we work with Mother Nature, so we don't get to control the main variable, but we do have little control over things that we do. And with the help of technologies like HotSpot, we can control the decisions that we've made and the actions. So yeah, there is a learning curve to use a HotSpot. We've selected them for many different reasons. And I'm sure Cassie will probably talk more about how the company was started, and that the fact that it was not started as a commercial product in the first place, but rather a system to help the founders of the company to work on their properties. That's, to me personally, a big selling point, because the system was designed for them to be used internally rather than to be distributed. And then it worked so well that they realized that they are able to help many other growers. And to be honest, the system is relatively simple to use. So it's another big selling point, because it's not just me who's using it, but also our irrigators, our range supervisors, who can log in and check on their iPads what's happening. And the learning curve was not necessarily difficult. We've received quite a lot of support from HotSpot, with their staff members being on site, training our irrigators, showing them how to use the system. We also use Tooly, and as Tom mentioned earlier, so it's nice that we can see the Tooly data on the dashboard in our HotSpot app or on the website. So that's a nice feature, because you don't need to go to open a new tab or open a new app to check the data from Tooly, but you can see everything in one place, sort of. So again, it's very convenient, because again, as many growers probably were also using many tools, so it's time consuming to go between tabs or applications to gather the data. So it's very nice when you can see it all together. It saves a lot of time and makes you actually want to check that information that you have from other tools that are helping you make irrigation decisions, for example. One of the big advantages, and again, I'm sure Cassie will talk more about it, but it is automated and it is functioning autonomously without people really being involved, except for the occasional checks. And of course, when we first set up the system, we've we've done multiple trials and checks. So we would run the system and check how it works, and like, does it actually send the alert when the pressure changes? Is it actually turning on and off at the times that we set it up? And it actually did. And again, we've learned some things, some of the block steps that are can be irrigated together versus others that cannot be irrigated together because the pressure is too high or the pump capacity is not there. So all of those things, HotSpot in a way does the analysis for you. So they do make suggestions on or they make it easy for you to make a decision on which blocks and subblocks can be irrigated together. So, but after we've tested the system and made sure it's working, we gained so much more time in a day that we can irrigate and not be there. For example, obviously nighttime, and even if I can see how for some people it still might be a concern, like what if something happens in the middle of the night? Maybe as a grower, you don't want to be receiving notifications in the middle of the night saying that the pressure, something is happening. But another way that we found that it can be, we can increase the efficiency is by turning the system on a few hours before the workday starts and turn it off a few hours later. So just a few hours. So that's another way how we've used the system and found it very useful, because again, our irrigators also had to trust the system. So that was one of the ways that we can prove them that, hey, it's actually working. You can trust that you programmed it starts, and then it will send you an alert if something goes wrong. And since it's only a few hours before and after, again, it makes it easier for people to manage it and be like, okay, it's only 2 hours before I start. If something happens, by the time I get to work, I can work on it, rather than doing it in the middle of the night or something like that. So this is kind of my part on how we've been using the system, and I'm happy to answer any other questions or to share more later on.
Thank you, Margarita. That's interesting how you sort of doing a phase in of gaining trust with your new robotic or artificial intelligence friends in the workforce. So yes, we'll talk more about that, I'm sure. But Cassie, do you want to do a quick introduction of yourself and then talk a little bit about HotSpot and how you're tying together artificial intelligence to help growers?
Yes, thank you, Kim. My name is Cassie Braswell. I am the Northern Coast Customer Success Manager for HotSpot. I've been with the company for about a year now, so I'm very grateful to be invited to speak on behalf of such a great company and to be joined by these industry professionals, leaders in the industry. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to share more about HotSpot. HotSpot was developed, as Margarita mentioned, by a family farmer, a generational farm in the Central Valley. James Nichols had graduated from UC Davis, and upon returning to the farm was tasked with monitoring the irrigation scheduling for the almonds and pistachios. They have about 4,600 acres or so down in the Central Valley, and getting on site, looking at the challenges that the irrigators were facing, along with the agronomists. There were some problems that they were having with what was achievable. And so James started looking at the technologies that were available and just really couldn't find a good solution. So that's when he got out there with the controllers and got to work and collecting the telemetry, and HotSpot was then implemented. So that was back in 2013. Over the course of the next years, it was expanded upon, and in 2018, 2019, it was identified that this was a really good solution that a lot of growers could benefit from. So they decided to make this more of a commercial application. And I really appreciate the fact that Margarita shared with us, some of the observations that she found when implementing the technology about, not getting out the water that was intended. That's exactly what they were facing on the farm, that, they had developed an irrigation schedule that was just not being achieved. So looking at the rate analysis tool really allows them to identify those where leaks in the drip line or plugged emitters. So here we are, and that's a little bit about the background of HotSpot. There's a lot of companies out there that come together, bring different sources of information to provide irrigation schedules. Truly does that so well with the actual evapotranspiration that is also used on the Nichols family farm. There are lesser companies out there that really help growers execute those irrigation schedules effectively, and that's what we focus on doing first and foremost. We cover a lot of ground with different sensors and data that we pull in, but helping growers execute irrigation schedules is what we focus. Our focus. So doing that through artificial intelligence, Tom had a great explanation of what that is, and I learned a lot through that portion. But through the efficiency, the sustainability, how we help growers in their profitability, just a couple of different examples. Saving water is one, not only through the precision irrigation that is done through the irrigation scheduling, but also things like autofill. So, combining different data points and through the sensor in the reservoir or in the tank, using that information through the controller to kick on a pump when the level gets down too low. And then as it fills, the system will tell the pump to turn off now that it's reached that set point. So in speaking with growers, there's a million and one things to do in a vineyard on the farm. And sometimes you get sidetracked, you get into a project, and before you know it, the tank's overfilled. So we're helping growers with addressing that challenge. Another way that we can help growers and increase their profitability is through saving energy. So oftentimes water is not the most expensive resource. It's certainly a limited resource, but energy can be quite costly, especially during those peak energy use hours. So we have created just a button that you can turn on if you want to run the pumps outside of those peak energy use hours between 4 and 9 p.m. And you can turn it off if you just absolutely need the water, if we're having a heat spike, and it doesn't matter if you're over and you need to be charged for those energy costs. So time of use is another feature that we can add for growers to help save, which also kind of ties into saving labor too. We're not having someone go out into the field to turn on and wait for the pumps to fill the reservoir, to irrigate, and then to turn off. And Carlos mentioned really well about the VFD. That's a great tool, the variable frequency drive, with integrating through those that equipment. We can, as you mentioned, set pressures. So with the different topography in Napa and Sonoma and in the North Coast, there's a lot of change in elevations. If you are irrigating a lower level, you're going to require a certain pressure setting versus as you would at a higher elevation. And through the widget, this irrigation scheduling widget, we can program the controller to say, if we're irrigating this block, it's going to be set at this pressure. Now, when you switch over to irrigating this other block, kick up the pump capacity and increase those pressures to irrigate, so that you're getting the distribution uniformity that's needed for the quality of grapes that are being produced. So talking a little bit about combining different set points, different data points for analysis, thinking about how we use all of those inputs to help growers making recommendations. There are some alerts and notifications that we also have set in place through the software. With the scheduling widget, if you have scheduled pumps to run and valves to open, but the pump capacity is not quite there, there's an icon where it will show as red, versus if you have scheduled the appropriate amount of pump capacity, it will turn green. If you try to save the irrigation schedule when it's red, it will give you a notification and says, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And you can override it if you choose, but that's a good little indicator there, is kind of a fail-safe. And speaking of fail safes, we have even more notifications. So nobody likes getting those notifications in the middle of the night, but even worse to come to work and see that there's a busted valve, or we have notifications that will alert you to what we call a deadhead. If the power is on, the pump is running, but there's no flow, cavitation can be a costly repair. It can be a lot of damage for the pumps. So we can alert growers to that. And that's built into the system. It's not something that you have to add on or ask for. It's already in the driver, happening automatically. And we get those alerts as well. So, we all get so many emails that it's hard to look through. But the first thing that we do, or in the morning or throughout the day, is we check out those alarms and call that to the grower's attention if there's anything really concerning. We talked about adjusting pressures through the VFD. Frost protection is another thing. It's hard to stay out of the vineyards when that can cause such costly damage. But what we can do is, if you have a weather station or a temperature sensor, we can control the wind machine engine. So we can say, okay, the vineyard temperature is now it's getting 36, it's at 34. So let's kick on that wind machine and help with the inversion layer. And when the desired temperature threshold has been met, let's say it's up to 40 degrees now, we'll kick off that wind machine. So not to say that it's going to keep growers from going out there and making sure that it's turned on, but maybe they can grab a cup of coffee on their way out before having to rush. So, speaking of temperature, we have weather stations with the temperature sensors. There's a VOC sensor, so that if the temperature gets too hot, if the air quality becomes an issue for the vineyard workers, send a notification to the vineyard manager to get everybody out of the vineyard before that can become hazardous. So it's in compliance with OSHA regulations as well. I think that about covers everything except something that was most important that we talked about was the integration. So at HotSpot, we have an open API, and we empathize with growers having, umpteen amount of logins to manage, and want to make it as easy as possible to facilitate using this technology. It's only good if it can be used. So with our open API, application programming interface, we have an integration with Thule, where you can schedule the irrigation scheduler. You can plug in that irrigation event based on the recommendation, as Margarita mentioned right there, that's shown with the Thule irrigation recommendation. So that's one example. We have other integrations through Google Sheets, Microsoft, other ag tech, SaaS, or software as a service, and others. So we want to make it easy for growers. When growers do well, we all win.
Thank you, Cassie. And that's you're talking about the API structure of HotSpot, which ties a little bit into also what Carlos was talking about, future-proofing. The API structure is a way of future-proofing your software as well, because when those new technologies come up, like a smart person like Tom thinks of something new, you can actually integrate that into and use that data in your system by having that structure. And thanks for bringing all those interesting examples of monitoring and decision makings by AIs there. And it made me think, and maybe Tom, you're the guy to answer this question. All these things that the AI is going to do for us, are the AI smarter than us?
No, certainly not yet. I think we need to see these as tools that help us become more efficient at our work and save costs, as well as get more time back. And listening to my fellow panelists here, they gave lots of examples of how the particular AI that they spent most time talking about here, which is valve automation, how much time and efficiency, how much time it's helped them save and how much efficiency it's helped them gain. But we're not at the general artificial intelligence yet. Or they're not smarter than us.
Well, I guess that's a little bit reassuring, but also, we could hope they could do everything right. But Cassie, you also mentioned a little bit about economics, and I think Carlos, can you talk a little bit more about what you guys were thinking about economically when you were making these decisions and making the investments? Did you have like an investment horizon? Were there certain things you were thinking about where you were going to make up some of those costs to make this worthwhile for you?
Well, let me tell you, not really to that level. And part of the reason is that because we think we are entering into a new territory. Sometimes we are adopting a technology that we don't know if it's going to work or not, but we are very technology oriented, let's say. And in the back of my mind, I knew that with all the new vineyard redevelopments, we were making things more granular. So just to give you an example, if we were talking about block sizes of about 2 acres, so for 700 acres is about 350 blocks. So how can we make our life easy? Not only for the operation itself, that otherwise would be quite complex, but also for Margarita's life when she's scaling irrigation. So we definitely are thinking more and more how we can integrate what Thule can do, what other technologies to read the canopies can do on helping us on irrigation, but not necessarily much on the economics. Of course, I can see a big saving in the future, given the complexity of the irrigation as it's going to be.
Thank you. And maybe this is more a question for Margarita. Based on the information that you got, the analysis and so on from the input monitoring and analysis that HotSpot would do, did you change? You talked a little bit about the irrigation schedule, but were there other things in your growing and workflows that you changed based on recommendations from the AIs?
Well, I think it was it's a big help in terms of logistics. That's where it helped me again to kind of visualize which blocks can be scheduled together at which times. And so that gave me probably a better understanding of how long it's going to take to irrigate a certain range. Again, just because of like Cassie mentioned, because the pressure limits of the pump and the suggestions of the system that tells you, hey, maybe this is too much, like the pump cannot handle this pressure. Where in the past, we potentially would have run it anyway, because we didn't know those things in the past, right, before the analysis. So now we are making sure that we're not damaging our pump and that the irrigation, again, what's scheduled is actually getting applied, and we don't have any pressure drops or increases. So everything is the way it was designed to be or meant to happen. So again, it helped more with the logistics to understand how things work. And then another point that I briefly mentioned is that, and the rest of the panel kind of mentioned it in a way as well, is that there are many tools that we use as growers to help us make irrigation decisions. For example, for us, Thule is a big help. And again, in the past, potentially we had to go and access different platforms and different websites to look for the information. And I like it a lot that it's integrated again in a HotSpot, because I can see the data right there and I don't need to go somewhere else. So again, it's saving my time. So that changed with the HotSpot, the need of going into other websites or platforms to retrieve the data that I'm looking for. And there's one more point that I completely forgot to mention, and that's sort of important, is the record keeping or data collection, because, different people and different growers use different ways of recording what has been done in the previous week, previous month in terms of irrigation. And then the data is actually saved in HotSpot. So your irrigator does not need to do a double entry or additional work somewhere, or write it on a piece of paper and give it to you at the end of the week so you can enter it on a spreadsheet or somewhere. So then, for example, next year when you want to see what has been done, you can actually check it in the system. So that's a very nice feature that, again, it just happens automatically, and it's very nice because you know that the data is saved.
Great.
And accurate too, right? I think that's another thing we sometimes see in those
it's accurate.
Irrigators reports. Yeah.
Yes, it's way more accurate, because sometimes you schedule 10 hours and all of a sudden you find out that it's only been done for 6, or I'm just throwing a number there, or 12 instead. So it's definitely way more precise, and the data is, again, accurate and precise.
Great. For others out there looking at implementing different forms of AI like these things, do you have any advice, other pitfalls that they could avoid? I guess that's a lot for you, Margarita, maybe for Carlos.
On my side, our experience has been not to start from scratch in a vineyard, but adapting the vineyard to new technologies. So try to plan in advance, because these transformations are not easy at the beginning. We expect to see a big advantage once they are working. That to make them happen from the beginning takes time. It was maybe 2-3 years of searching and checking on what would be the best solution for us, and we are now happy with what we have done. But again, it takes time, and there's a lot of learning in the meantime.
Yeah, I agree with Carlos to do as much work in advance as you can, even if maybe you're not ready to adopt this sort of technology in the next year or two, but maybe in future. Again, we're facing so many challenges with labor availability, with other things happening in the industry, and just the fact that you could potentially make your life better in future. Again, maybe you're not ready to make an investment this year or in the next 2 years, but if you can do some work in preparation once you redevelop the vineyards, I think it's very, very helpful. And just be ready to learn a new tool and a new technology. It's not a pitfall for me personally, but I can see how for some people it might sound a little more challenging. Oh, it's another thing for me to learn how to use, but the reality is not that difficult to use once you understand and learn it, and it's truly very helpful. So I would recommend people to be open-minded about adopting a technology like this and give it a try. And again, be ready to learn a new technology.
Great. Now we're coming towards the end here. Cassie, you had something you want to add to that?
Just to expand upon that thought, that if someone is thinking years out and they want to create a roadmap of how they're going to get to the point of automation, we can come out and do a site visit, free consultation to kind of point you in the right direction, kind of walk through what that would look like if you're doing a new development, where to put those valve manifolds, how much you can get, how much data you can collect at one site on one controller, and be a resource for anyone who's interested in learning more.
Right. So to tie it up here a little bit at the end, I would like to try and put all of you on the spot and challenge you with a final question, which could be, I guess, for Tom and Cassie, what do you think AI is going to do for ag in the future? And for Margarita and for Carlos, what would you like it to do for you? So Tom, do you want to start with that?
Sure, I'll start with that. And I want to start with revisiting our definition of AI. So AI is a computer system that can do something that you normally think of a human doing. And to answer your question of where I think AI is going to be helping growers in the future, and actually where it's helping them now, I want to break it down into different segments of tools or different types of AI. And the first one that comes to mind is monitoring. I can't help but to mention what I've spent the last 10 years of my life doing. We normally think of a human going out into a vineyard to monitor the water status of the vines, and now we can do that with a sensor, such as a Thule sensor. And I think another example of that has come up in our conversation today has been monitoring the pump system. You don't need a person driving around on a ATV anymore to know that your pump is operating and your filters, et cetera, are operating as you need them to be. So that's not about the future. That's happening now. Well, I'll give another example because it hasn't come up here, and I think people might find it interesting, just to be able to kind of talk about different things that are either here or are coming. So another one that's coming is a technology developed by Mason Earls, the AI professor at the University of California, Davis, in the viticulture and enology department. And it's a computer vision system that lives on the front of your tractor or on your ATV. And it is a turnkey system where all the charging and the data transfer is all figured out, and the grower doesn't have to figure it out. And what Mason's specialty really is not so much, is really in the algorithms and developing these recipes for computers to produce artificial intelligence. And some of these different algorithms that he's been developing on this technology called AgKit are things like canopy monitoring. So you can see how tall your canopies are, and you can know when your canopies are slowing down. There's other things he's doing with it where he has a pretty good cluster count model on there now too. I haven't seen the most recent one, but I was just talking to him the other week, and it sounds like he's made a lot of progress on that. Just anything you can do with your eyes. Think of all the things that viticulturists do with their eyes when they go into a vineyard. If you have a camera system passing through the vineyard on every ATV or tractor pass, we could be doing the same things, and we will be doing the same things with that. And putting it all on a map where you can see, okay, here's where my shoots are slowing down in this particular block. Here's my cluster counts throughout the block, not at just 6 sample points. And I think that's something we're going to be seeing soon. So I just addressed the domain of monitoring, the artificial intelligence domain of monitoring. Another area where we're seeing things happen now, and we're going to see more in the future, is control, which is a lot of what HotSpot does, controlling valves, controlling wind machines. Another example of this, something that's here now and we'll see more of too in the future, is the ability to expand the abilities of a tractor driver by having computer vision and robotic systems provide more control over the implements. There's a company out there called Beagle, where it's a computer system a computer vision system that looks at the height of the spur positions as it travels down a vineyard and can make adjustments to the implement so that the implement really follows the height of the spur positions as you move through the vineyard. And this is important for things like pruning, or pre-pruning is probably how it'd be more likely used in the North Coast. But in the Central Valley, it could do the entire pruning. And another example is like shoot thinning. This sort of more accurate control of the implements will make it so that your tractor driver doesn't have to just control, your tractor driver can do fewer passes throughout a whole vineyard because they're not monitoring, they're not operating the implement, just one implement at a time, but they can just drive down the row, and then you can have multiple implements doing more than one row, at least 2 rows at once, and lower your passes and get better results potentially. Certainly, actually, if you have a computer vision system doing it rather than a tractor driver who's trying to drive the tractor and look at the thing. And I think I still feel like I should mention something about large language models, but because ChatGPT is everywhere in the media these days, we're going to see more of that in the vineyard world. But so far, I was just reading a survey about how people are using large language models, and people are mostly using them, just hobbyists as fun. I think the people that there's people in content marketing and marketing in general that use generative AI to produce in their workflows. And developers use large language models a lot to help them write code. But how that's going to fit in viticulture quite yet, I'm not exactly sure. I think that, it would be fun to have an entire panel about where we could go with this, because it really is a powerful technology.
Thanks, Tom. Margarita, do you want to take on, where do you want help from AI in the future?
I think Tom brought up a lot of good topics, such as help with monitoring or scouting precisely things like cluster counts, or maybe the phenological states or stages of the vineyard. Because right now we usually do it by walking the vineyard, looking at the block, and making it's a judgment call. I think it's at 30% bloom right now. And why do I think it's 30%? It's just I look around and this is what I think. But it would be nice if there is a tool that can help me actually by walking, let's say, certain percent of the block, it will generate the percent bloom or any other variation, any other phenological stage. That would be super helpful. And also, obviously, if it's technology, it will most likely put it on a map. So that's another great feature that I hope we'll be able to use in future to have a better visual idea of what's happening. Because when you're out in the field, and now there are some tools, but it's not as straightforward. It would be nice if it's all integrated. And again, if you're doing certain scouting or some monitoring in the vineyard, and then you can go back in the office and look at the map and see the results of it. I think it's going to be super helpful.
Well, Carlos, can we get your thoughts too on where you see some help from AI for Winegrowing in the future?
Yes, I would say that there's still a gap between all the information that we can gather from new technology coming in and the possibility that we have to apply it into the vineyards. So one example could be, for example, NDVI is something that we are all very familiar. We use it. It's very useful in many ways, but we still don't see, for example, the possibility to do a prescription on a block with different levels of fertilizations or different fertilizers depending on imagery. So I'm hoping to see more and more technology being able to apply it in the vineyard on a practical level. Then, so yeah, basically, I think that's the way I would like to see it in the future.
Great, thanks, Carlos. And Cassie, only to you. What do you think we're gonna see? Are you coming up with something?
We do have a few things in the works. I've been instructed to not overshare at this time, but a couple of things that we have going on right now. We're just at the cusp of what Carlos mentioned with without the imagery, but with implementing the fertigation. We have a pretty advanced fertigation skid, so it allows for a variable rate of 13 to 53 gallons per hour application. You can use it with the irrigation scheduling widget to apply specific amounts. So it's pretty sophisticated tool with a built-in VFT pressure sensor, flow sensors to get the nutrients in the root zone, so you're not over fertilizing, wasting fertilizer, and making the most of what you have. So there's that. And then a water budgeting tool. We had ample amounts of rain this year, but that hasn't always been the case. And with Mother Nature, throwing curveballs at us all the time, climates being always more challenging to overcome. And With our water budgeting tool, we can allow growers insight into their system, also with the amount of water available they have for the season, so they can make decisions based on, is there a heat event that's coming that's going to cause damage and I need to apply additional amounts? Do I have enough to last through the season, through harvest and beyond if I do that? So that's what we have in the works right now that I can share. And just to kind of expand upon what's been talked about, I think it's great that Margarita and Carlos have some good ideas. Our core values are trust and collaboration. So the reason that HotSpot was created was because of a need. Necessity is the mother of invention, something like that Plato used to say. So I would encourage everyone watching to really think about, what is taking the most time in my day-to-day. We're essentially monitoring inputs, voltage and amperage, and there's a lot that we can do that we just have touched the surface of with these sensors and controllers. And so encouraging everyone watching to think about what their needs are and then give us a call and see if we can help with that.
Thank you, Cassie. And I think with that, we're going to wrap it up. So thank you all of you for being part of this conversation. Tom, Carlos, Margarita, and of course, Cassie, for being here and sharing your insights. Hope to see you again in the future when maybe some of these things have come to pass.
Thank you.
Thank you.